My husband chose the very night he became CEO to serve me divorce papers in front of his cackling mother. She laughed as if watching me get erased. So I signed everything with a steady hand. They thought I had surrendered. But just as he toasted his victory, my phone buzzed with a single text saying, "Do not leave the room. Dad is coming." The doors flew open, revealing my military father flanked by two armed men. My name is Claire Lopez, and I am 38 years old. I was sitting in the private velvet-draped dining room of the St. Anthony Hotel in San Antonio, a place that smelled of old money and lemon polish. The crystal chandelier above us fractured the light into 1,000 jagged rainbows, casting them over the face of my husband, Brent Caldwell. He stood at the head of the mahogany table, holding a champagne flute high, his cheeks flushed with the kind of victory that only comes from crushing someone else. The board members of Vanguard Ridge Industries were applauding, the sound polite but heavy, acknowledging the man who had just been named their new CEO. I was the only one not clapping. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping the silk napkin so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The applause died down, replaced by the clinking of silverware and the low hum of self-congratulatory conversation. That was when Brent sat down, turned his body toward me, and slid a thick manila envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. It moved with a heavy, sliding rasp that cut through the ambient noise. It stopped right next to my untouched plate of sea bass, for the sake of appearances, for the sake of the investors watching us. He kept a smile plastered on his face, but his eyes were dead. They were the eyes of a shark that had smelled blood in the water. "Open it," he mouthed, loud enough for the people on either side of us to hear, but quiet enough to maintain the facade of intimacy. I opened the clasp. Inside was a stack of legal documents, still warm from the printer. The bold text at the top of the first page screamed its intent: petition for dissolution of marriage. Underneath that was a settlement agreement and a non-disclosure agreement. I looked up at him. He was watching me with a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He had chosen this moment, the pinnacle of his career, to discard the ladder he had used to climb there. "Well, go on." Honey, Marilyn, my mother-in-law, spoke up from across the table. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the room like a serrated knife. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my father's annual pension, and she wore her cruelty just as proudly. "Read it, unless the words are too big for you." A few of the board members chuckled nervously, unsure if this was a family joke or a public execution. Marilyn took a sip of her wine, her eyes gleaming with malice. I picked up the document. I did not need to read every word to understand what was happening. I had spent years analyzing risk and reading the fine print of contracts that were far more complex than this petty attempt at extortion. I scanned the key clauses. It was a trap, a beautifully constructed, vicious trap. The terms were insulting. I would receive the marital home, a sprawling property on the north side of the city that I knew, for a fact, was leveraged to the hilt with 3 different mortgages. It was not an asset. It was a sinking ship of debt. There was a lump sum payment of $50,000, framed as a generous parting gift, and a monthly stipend that would barely cover the property taxes on the house they were dumping on me. But the real kicker was the NDA. In exchange for this financial ruin, I was to agree to a lifetime of silence. I could never speak about Vanguard Ridge. I could never speak about Brent's tenure. I could never speak about the irregularities I had seen over the last decade. If I signed, I was agreeing to be erased. "See, this is why men need to be careful," Marilyn announced to the table, her voice booming now. She gestured toward me with her fork. "You give a woman a little bit of access, and she thinks she owns the place. Women should know their place. Sometimes, you have to remind them where the door is." The humiliation washed over me, hot and prickly. I could feel the eyes of the VIPs boring into me. They were watching the CEO's wife be stripped of her dignity between the main course and dessert. They expected tears. They expected a scene. They expected me to throw a glass of wine or beg for mercy. Brent leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sign it. Claire, Do it now, and we keep this civilized. Fight me, and I will bury you in legal fees until you are living in your car." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the weakness behind the bluster. I saw the desperate need for validation that I had spent 18 years feeding. I did not cry. I did not scream. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own pen. It was a heavy silver fountain pen that my father had given me when I graduated college. I uncapped it. The sound of the scratching nib was the only thing I could hear. I turned to the last page of the settlement. I signed my name, Claire Lopez Caldwell. I dated it. I turned to the NDA. I signed that too. I signed the waiver of rights. I signed the transfer of the debt-ridden house. I signed every single page with a steady hand, flipping the sheets with a rhythmic snap. The room went quiet. They were stunned. Marilyn actually stopped chewing. Brent blinked, his smug expression faltering for a split second before reassembling into triumph. He thought I was broken. He thought I was rolling over and showing my belly like a frightened dog. I capped the pen and placed it back in my purse. I pushed the signed papers back across the table toward him. "There," I said, my voice calm and even. "It is all yours." Brent snatched the papers up, checking the signatures as if he couldn't believe his luck. He let out a breath he had been holding. "Good girl," he said. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made two of the investors jump. I smoothed the front of my dress. "I'm going to the ladies' room," I announced. Brent waved a hand dismissively, already turning back to the man on his right to accept another round of congratulations. He had what he wanted. I was no longer a person to him. I was a loose end that had been tied off. I leaned down, bringing my face close to his ear. The smell of his expensive cologne, a scent I used to love, now made me nauseous. "Brent," I whispered. He turned his head slightly, annoyed at the interruption. "What? You just signed for yourself the most expensive sentence of your life." I pulled back before he could process the words. I walked away from the table, my heels clicking on the parquet floor, keeping my back straight and my head high. I could feel Marilyn's gaze burning a hole between my shoulder blades, but I did not look back. I stepped out into the corridor, the heavy double doors closed behind me, muting the sound of the party. The hallway was empty, lined with plush carpet and golden sconces. The silence was sudden and overwhelming. I leaned against the wall, letting out a long, shaky breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had done it. I had baited the trap. But now I was alone, and the weight of what I was up against crashed down on me. I was one woman against a corporation, against a family with millions of dollars and zero morals. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I fumbled for it, my fingers trembling slightly. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a new message. It was from a number I had not saved, but I knew who it was. I would know that brevity anywhere. "Do not leave the room. Dad is coming." I stared at the screen. The words blurred for a second. Dad. He was coming. I looked at the timestamp. It was received 1 minute ago. A sudden, fierce calm settled over me. The trembling in my hands stopped. The fear that had been clawing at my throat evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was not alone, and I was not the victim here. I put the phone back in my bag. I checked my reflection in a hallway mirror. My lipstick was perfect. My eyes were clear. I turned around. I walked back to the double doors of the private dining room. I pushed them open. The conversation inside lulled as I re-entered. Brent looked up, frowning. He had expected me to run. He had expected me to flee into the night, ashamed and defeated. Instead, I walked back to the table. I pulled out my chair. I sat down. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip, looking directly at Marilyn over the rim. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who hears the thunder long before anyone else sees the lightning. I settled in, smoothed my napkin over my lap, and waited for the second act to begin. I drove home alone in the silence of a car that felt more like a tomb than a vehicle. The engine hummed a low, steady rhythm that contrasted with the chaos I had just left behind at the hotel, but my pulse was not racing. I was not crying. I did not grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, nor did I scream into the void. Those were the reactions of a woman who was heartbroken. I was not heartbroken. I was calculating. When I pulled into the driveway of the sprawling colonial house on the north side, the house that Brent had so graciously bestowed upon me along with its crippling mortgages, I did not turn on the lights. I walked through the foyer in the dark, my heels clicking on the marble with a sound that echoed like a metronome. I navigated the space by memory, bypassing the living room where we used to host Christmas parties and the dining room where Marilyn had criticized my table settings for 15 years. I went straight to the master bedroom, walked into the walk-in closet, and pushed aside a row of winter coats that I would never wear again. Behind a false panel in the wall, which Brent believed was just access to the plumbing, sat a heavy steel safe. I spun the dial, left to 32, right to 14, left to 88. The lock tumbled with a satisfying heavy click. I pulled the door open and bypassed the jewelry box containing the diamond earrings Brent had given me after his first affair. I reached past the stack of emergency cash. My hand closed around a thick black accordion folder. I called it the marriage file. I carried it to my home office, a room Brent rarely entered because he found it boring. He assumed I used this space to plan charity galas or organize the household budget. That was the greatest mistake of his life. You see, the Caldwell family had always viewed me through a very specific, very narrow lens. To them, I was Claire the housewife, Claire the support system, Claire the woman who looked good in a cocktail dress and knew when to nod politely. They believed my degree in economics was just a piece of paper I had acquired to pass the time before finding a husband. They did not know about Marilyn Advisory for the past 7 years, under a maiden name and through a remote encrypted server. I had been working as a senior risk analyst for Marilyn, a boutique firm that specialized in forensic auditing for distressed corporations. I did not just understand numbers, I understood how people hid them. I spent my days hunting for the exact kind of rot that Brent was trying to cover with cologne and charisma. I sat down at my desk and turned on my laptop. The blue light washed over the black folder as I unzipped it. Inside was not a collection of love letters or photos. It was a graveyard of financial impropriety. I had been suspicious of Brent for a long time, but not for the reasons he thought. He thought I was jealous of his late nights. I was actually suspicious of the documents he would bring home, the ones he would slide across the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening with a casual air, asking me to sign as a witness or a spousal beneficiary. He would say things like, "Oh, this is just standard compliance for the new merger," or "legal needs this for the insurance audit." I had signed them, but I had also scanned them. I spread the papers out on the desk. Tonight was not about discovery. Tonight was about assembly. I needed to build the weapon before the sun came up. I picked up a stack of printed emails. I had gained access to his private server 3 years ago when he was too lazy to change his password from the name of his first dog. I began to sort them into piles. Pile 1 was the shell companies. There were invoices here from a company called Apex Logistics, based in a post office box in Delaware. Vanguard Ridge had paid Apex over $400,000 in the last fiscal year for consulting services. I knew for a fact that Vanguard did not use external logistics consultants. Pile 2 was the kickbacks. Transfers of $10,000, $15,000, always just under the limit that would trigger an automatic IRS flag, sent to accounts linked to members of the city council just before zoning permits were approved for Vanguard's new factories. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had memorized, but never saved in my contacts. It was nearly 1 in the morning, but I knew he would be awake. Miles Rourke answered on the second ring. His voice was gravelly, the voice of a man who spent too much time arguing with federal prosecutors. "Did you sign the papers?" he asked. No pleasantries. Miles was not a man for small talk. "I did," I said, cradling the phone between my shoulder and ear as I highlighted a line item on a bank statement. "I signed everything. The settlement, the waiver, the NDA." "Good," Miles said. "Now they think you are neutralized. They will get sloppy. They will stop looking over their shoulders because they think they have bought your silence." He is terrified. "Miles," I said, my finger tracing a transaction date. He practically threw the papers at me. He needed me out of that company tonight. Tell me what you have found, Miles commanded. I looked at the spread of documents. It is not just embezzlement, I said, my voice dropping an octave as the realization crystallized. I am looking at the vendor list. He has been funneling money into a proprietary research project called Project Obsidian. On paper, it is R&D, but looking at the procurement orders, he is buying military-grade components that Vanguard is not licensed to possess. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Claire, Miles said slowly, if he is moving restricted tech without a license, that is not civil court. That is federal prison. That is treason adjacent. I know. I said, but that is not the worst part. I pulled a document from the bottom of the stack. It was a digital printout I had recovered from his deleted items folder just 2 days ago. It was a compliance certification for a government contract, specifically for the supply of guidance chips to a defense contractor. It is a document that requires the signature of the chief financial officer and the independent compliance officer. At the time this was dated, 6 months ago, the compliance officer was on medical leave. I stared at the signature line at the bottom of the page. The name signed there was C. Lopez, my maiden name. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine, colder than the air conditioning in the room. Miles, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I am looking at a federal compliance certificate. It is dated November 12th of last year. And? Miles prompted. It has my signature on it. I said, did you sign it? No, I said firmly, on November 12th. I was in Chicago visiting my sister. I was nowhere near the office. I have never seen this document in my life. I heard the sound of a chair creaking as Miles sat up straight. He forged your signature? Miles asked. No, I said, leaning in closer to the paper, examining the loops of the C and the sharp slant of the L. It is not a forgery. It looks exactly like my handwriting. He must have used a digital stamp from one of the house deeds or insurance papers I signed years ago. He lifted my signature and pasted it onto a federal document to bypass the audit. The implication hit me with the force of a physical blow. He did not just want to divorce me. Miles, he needed to divorce me to bury this. If this project goes south, if the feds audit this contract, he is not the one who signed off on the legality of it. You are the fall guy, Miles said, his voice hard. He set you up as the compliance officer of record without you even being on the payroll. If the Department of Defense comes knocking, they are coming for Claire Lopez. I looked at the document, at the lie written in black ink that carried my name, all those years of being dismissed, of being told I didn't understand business, of being treated like furniture. He had not just underestimated me, he had commoditized me. He had turned my identity into a shield to protect himself from his own crimes. I felt a surge of anger so pure it felt like clarity. He thinks I am his shield, I said to Miles. I hung up the phone and stared at the document. The timestamp on the file metadata showed it was modified 3 hours before the party tonight. He was scrubbing the server, consolidating the files, making sure that if anyone looked, all roads led to his ex-wife. I realized then that the NDA was not to keep me from talking about his money. It was to keep me from talking about my own innocence. I reached for the external hard drive I had prepared, the one containing every single file from the Marrowline servers that linked Brent's personal accounts to these fraudulent contracts. I am not the shield. I whispered to the empty room, I am the sword. And then I saw it. In the bottom corner of the certification, in microscopic print, was a reference code. It linked to a secondary server, one I had not been able to access before, but now, looking at the pattern of the code, I recognized it. It was his birthday backwards, combined with the date of our wedding. Even in his crimes, he was sentimental about his ownership of me. I typed the code into the terminal. The screen flashed, and a new folder opened. My breath caught in my throat. This was not just a contract. This was a list of bribes, and right at the top, authorized by a signature that looked terrifyingly like mine, was a transfer of $2 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I had him. I had him dead to rights, but I also knew that if I moved too early, he would claim I was a bitter ex-wife planting evidence. I needed to wait for him to activate the final phase of his plan. I closed the laptop. The darkness of the room rushed back in. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I knew exactly what was hiding in it. I sat in the leather chair of my home office, the silence of the empty house pressing against my ears. The adrenaline from the hotel and the discovery of the forged signature was beginning to settle into a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. I looked at the wedding photo on the corner of the desk. It was from 18 years ago. We looked so young. Brent looked terrified, and I looked adoring. If you looked closely at that photo, you could see the dynamic that would define the next 2 decades of my life. I was leaning in, holding him up, and he was looking at the camera, waiting for the applause. I met Brent when Vanguard Ridge was not an industry titan, but a struggling startup bleeding cash in a rented warehouse on the outskirts of Austin. He was charming, ambitious, and completely disorganized. He had big ideas about component manufacturing, but no idea how to manage cash flow or navigate regulatory compliance. I was 20 years old, a junior analyst with a brain that worked in spreadsheets and risk probabilities. I fell in love with his potential. That is the most dangerous thing a woman like me can do. I fell in love with the project of him. For the first 5 years, I was not just his wife. I was his uncredited chief financial officer. I worked a full day at my own job, then came home and worked until 2 in the morning fixing his books. I built the financial architecture that saved the company. I designed the cost-cutting protocols that made his first quarter profitable. I created the forecasting models that he used to secure his first $1 million loan. I remembered the night he won the Entrepreneur of the Year award. I had written his acceptance speech. I had coached him on the cadence, on where to pause for effect, on how to look humble yet commanding. He stood on that stage, the spotlight hitting his perfect teeth, and thanked his parents. He thanked his mentors. He thanked his golf buddies. He did not thank me. When I asked him about it later, in the car ride home, he laughed it off. He said, "Babe, it is about the brand. Investors need to see me as the singular visionary. It confuses the market if they think I am leaning on my wife. You understand, do you not?" I understood. I always understood. I told myself it was a partnership, even if my name was not on the door. I told myself I was the foundation, and foundations are meant to be invisible. But the foundation was cracking long before tonight. The Caldwell family never let me forget that I was an acquisition, not a merger, to Marilyn. I was useful. I was the one who remembered birthdays, who organized the galas, who smoothed over the social cracks Brent created with his arrogance, but I was never one of them. I was the help that slept in the master bedroom. I remember a dinner 3 years ago. Marilyn was complaining about a tax audit on her estate. She turned to me and said, "Claire, deal with that for me, will you? You are so good with the boring little details. Boring little details." That was what they called my life's work. That was what they called the intellect that kept them out of bankruptcy court. In the last 2 years, the dynamic had shifted from dismissal to exclusion. Brent started locking his phone. He started taking calls on the terrace. He stopped asking for my advice on the numbers. When I tried to ask about the company's expansion into foreign markets, he would wave a hand and say, "You would not understand the complexities." "Claire, it is high-level stuff." He was telling the woman who built his entire operational model that she would not understand how it worked. That was when I started paying attention to the shadows. Her name was Tessa Rowe. She was 26 years old, the new head of internal public relations. I had met her at the company Christmas party. She was bright, bubbly, and looked at Brent with the kind of hero worship I had abandoned a decade ago. She was everything I was not. She was the yes woman. She was the audience he craved. She did not ask about debt-to-equity ratios. She asked him how it felt to be a genius. I saw the way he looked at her. It was not just lust, it was relief. She offered him a reflection where he was perfect, where he didn't have to pretend to be smarter than he was because, to her, he actually was the smartest man in the room. I realized then that I was a reminder of his inadequacy. Every time he looked at me, he saw the woman who knew the truth. He saw the woman who knew that the great Brent Caldwell still needed help tying his financial shoes. The divorce party tonight was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. As I sat there in the dark, connecting the dots, the cruelty of it became mathematical. He chose the night of his CEO announcement for a reason. He wanted to shed his old skin. I was part of the startup phase. I was the legacy infrastructure that was no longer compatible with the new update. He wanted to walk into his future with Tessa, the shiny new accessory that fit the CEO brand, and leave the glitchy, knowing wife in the past. It was an execution. They had rehearsed it. Marilyn's laughter, the pre-printed documents, the audience of VIPs. It was all designed to shame me into silence. They wanted to crush me so completely that I would crawl into a hole and never speak the name Vanguard Ridge again. They didn't just want a divorce. They wanted an erasure. They wanted to rewrite history so that Brent Caldwell built his empire alone, a self-made god who rose from nothing. I was an inconvenience to that narrative, but arrogance has a funny way of making people blind. I looked down at the documents spread across my desk again. I touched the paper where my name had been forged. In their haste to push me out, in their desperation to streamline their narrative, they had made a fatal error. They thought they were throwing me away. But by using my name to sign off on their illegal shortcuts, by using my identity to cover their fraud, they had tethered themselves to me more tightly than any marriage license ever could. Brent wanted to pretend I never existed. He wanted to claim he did it all himself, but the paperwork told a different story. The paperwork said that Claire Lopez was everywhere. I picked up a red pen. I circled the date on the forged compliance certificate. Then I circled the date on the bank transfer I had found earlier. They wanted to delete me. But the irony was, they had left their fingerprints all over my life. And unlike them, I knew how to read the code. I was not just a scorned wife anymore. I was the archivist of their destruction. And I was just getting started. The morning after the party, the world outside was bright and oblivious, but inside my home office, the blinds were drawn. The air was thick with the hum of cooling fans from my hard drives. I had not slept. I was running on espresso and a cold, focused rage that sharpened my mind better than any stimulant. Miles Rourke did not waste time. By 8 a.m, he had established a secure, encrypted bridge between my laptop and the servers of Stonebridge Forensics. Stonebridge was not the kind of firm you found in the phone book. They were a team of ex-IRS auditors and former cybercrime investigators who specialized in unearthing what powerful men tried very hard to bury. I sat with a headset on, watching a shared screen as a lead forensic accountant named Sarah walked me through what they had found in the initial data dump I had provided from the Marrowline cloud. "Claire, are you looking at line item 42? Sarah's voice was crisp, professional, and entirely devoid of pity. That is how I knew she was good. "I am looking at it," I said, zooming in on the spreadsheet. "It is a vendor payment to a company called North Star Logistics." We ran a background check on North Star. Sarah said, "It does not exist. The address listed is a vacant lot in Nevada. The tax ID number belongs to a deceased man from Florida. But in the last 18 months, Vanguard Ridge has paid them 3 separate installments totaling $1,200,000. I felt a tightness in my chest. 3 payments, $1.2 million. "Where did the money go?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "It bounced," Sarah explained, highlighting the flow of funds in red. "It went from Vanguard to North Star, sat there for 24 hours, and then was transferred to a consulting firm in Panama. From there, it was broken up into smaller amounts, $9,000 here, $8,000 there, and funneled into incentive funds for executive bonuses." I stared at the screen. It was a classic round-tripping scheme. Brent was taking company money, washing it through a ghost vendor, and bringing it back to pad his own pockets and the pockets of his inner circle. It was theft, plain and simple. But then Sarah pulled up a new document. "This is where it gets dangerous for you. Claire, look at the authorization for the North Star contract." I looked. It was a vendor approval form. And there, at the bottom, was the signature of the reviewing officer, C. Lopez. My stomach dropped. He had used my name to authorize the theft. It gets worse, Sarah continued. We found a folder labeled Regulatory Compliance hidden in a subdirectory of the server. She opened it. Inside were dozens of PDF files, safety certifications for factory equipment, environmental impact statements, labor standard audits. Every single one of them bore my signature or my digital stamp. I sat back in my chair, the blood draining from my face. These were not just internal memos. These were federal requirements. If the factory was dumping chemicals illegally, or if the equipment failed and injured a worker, the investigation would go straight to the person who signed off on the safety checks. That person was me. I started typing furiously, searching the email archives I had downloaded for any mention of these documents. I needed to know the intent. Was this just laziness? Was he just using my stamp because it was convenient? I found an email chain from 6 months ago. It was between Brent and his chief operations officer, a man named Gary who I had hosted for dinner a dozen times. The subject line was, Audit Concerns Regarding North Star. Gary had written, Brent, the auditors are asking why we are using an unverified vendor for logistics. We need a sign-off from risk management, or this is going to get flagged. I held my breath as I scrolled down to Brent's reply. Do not worry about it. He had written, I will handle the sign-off. I have Claire's stamp. Put it on the paperwork. No one looks twice at the wife's signature. She is just a rubber stamp to them anyway. If questions come up later, we can just say she reviewed it at home. It gives us a firewall. I read the word again, firewall. I was not a partner. I was not even a person. I was a human shield. He had built a firewall out of my reputation and my name to protect himself from the heat of his own crimes. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was his exit strategy. He knew the company was rotting from the inside because of his embezzlement. He knew that eventually, the regulators would come knocking, and when they did, he planned to stand there, the grieving, betrayed CEO, and say, I had no idea. My wife handled the compliance. I trusted her, and she betrayed the company. He would walk away with the money. I would go to prison for fraud and embezzlement. I picked up my phone and texted Miles. He is framing me. It is not just the house. He is setting me up to take the fall for federal crimes. Miles replied instantly. Keep digging. We need a timeline. Prove premeditation. I turned back to my screens. I opened a new blank canvas and started building a timeline, placing every forged signature, every wire transfer, and every major life event on a single horizontal axis. January 15th. Brent transfers $300,000 to the Panama account. January 16th. A compliance form for Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is signed by C. Lopez. March 3rd. Brent buys Tessa a diamond bracelet worth $40,000. March 4th. Another forged signature on a vendor approval form. I kept adding data points. The pattern was undeniable. Every time he stole money, he forged my name within 48 hours to cover the paper trail. Then I looked at the recent dates. 2 weeks ago, Vanguard Ridge announces the board vote for the massive acquisition of a rival tech firm, a deal worth $400 million. 1 week ago, Brent creates a file named Full Liability Release, C. Lopez. Last night, the divorce papers are served, including the NDA and the waiver of all claims. The pieces click together like the tumblers of a safe, the acquisition. If Vanguard bought this rival company, the due diligence process would be intense. Auditors would crawl through every inch of Vanguard's books. They would find the North Star payments. They would find the fake safety audits. Brent needed me divorced and silenced before that deal closed. He needed that full liability release signed so that when the auditors found the fraud, he could produce the document and say, "We discovered my ex-wife's misconduct. We removed her from the family, and she accepted liability." The divorce was not the end of the relationship. It was the final step in the frame-up. I looked at the company calendar on the shared drive. Next Friday, 10 in the morning. Special board meeting to vote on the acquisition of Cyberdyne Systems. That was the deadline. If that vote happened, the acquisition would go through. The external auditors would come in, they would find the mess, and by then, Brent would have my signed divorce papers in one hand and the forged compliance docs in the other. He would close the lid on my coffin and nail it shut. I stared at the date. Next Friday. I had 7 days. 7 days to dismantle a lie that he had spent 18 years constructing. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Stonebridge team. "Claire," Sarah typed in the chat box. "You need to see this. We just found the agenda for the board meeting. Look at item number 4. I opened the document. Item 4. Ratification of all prior compliance certifications and risk assessments conducted by the external advisor. C. Lopez. They were going to vote to fast-track the approval of all the documents I had supposedly signed. Once the board voted to ratify them, they became company law. The lie would be cemented in the corporate record forever. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. He was not just going to let me take the fall if things went wrong. He was actively engineering a vote that would make it impossible for me to ever deny those signatures. I grabbed my phone and dialed Miles. "Miles," I said, my voice shaking with the intensity of the discovery. "They are voting next Friday. They are going to ratify the forgeries. Then we have to stop that meeting." Miles said, "No," I said, staring at the screen, my eyes narrowing. "If we stop the meeting, he will just hide the evidence. He will shred the documents. He will claim it was a clerical error." I looked at the timeline I had built. I looked at the email where he called me a rubber stamp. "We let the meeting happen," I said, a dangerous idea forming in my mind. "Claire, that is suicide," Miles warned. "No," I said, "it is a trap. But this time, I am not the one walking into it." I hung up. I looked at the calendar. 7 days. Brent thought he was the only one who could play the long game. He thought he was the only one who understood leverage. But he had forgotten the first rule of risk analysis. The most dangerous variable is the one you think you have already controlled. I was that variable, and I was about to become very, very uncontrollable. 2 days after the party, the silence of the house was broken by the ringing of my phone. The screen flashed with the name Brent. It was 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, in the old days. A call at this hour meant he had forgotten where he left his golf clubs or needed me to remind him of a donor's name. Today, it felt like a probe sent into deep water to see if it hit a mine. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I needed to sound groggy, defeated. I cleared my throat and answered. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice soft and slightly uneven. "Claire." His voice was warm, dripping with that manufactured concern he used on shareholders when earnings were down. "I just wanted to check on you. I know the other night was intense. I wanted to make sure you are holding up." He was not checking on me. He was checking on his firewall. "I am fine." "Brent," I said, leaning back in my office chair. My eyes were fixed on the screen where the Stonebridge Forensics timeline was glowing in high definition. "I am just trying to process everything. It is a lot to pack up 18 years in a weekend." "I know," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. He thought I was wallowing. "Listen, I noticed some activity on the shared cloud server. Just some old files being accessed. I assumed that was you? Just grabbing some personal photos?" There it was. The real question. "Oh, that," I said, making my voice sound dismissive. "Yes, I was looking for the tax returns from 3 years ago. My accountant said I need them to properly calculate the capital gains on the house you gave me. Since it is so leveraged, I need to make sure I do not get hit with a bill I cannot pay." There was a pause. I could hear him calculating. Tax returns were boring. Tax returns were safe. They were not secret compliance certificates. "Right," he said. "Well, make sure you only take what is yours. Claire, we do not want to violate the NDA by having you in possession of proprietary company data. I would not dream of it. I lied. I just want this to be over. Brent, I just want to move on." "Good," he said. "That is good. You are being sensible." He hung up. He thought he had reassured himself. He thought the mouse was cowering in the corner. He did not know the mouse was currently building a guillotine. An hour later, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite ring. It was a long, insistent press that demanded attention. I checked the security camera. Marilyn. I opened the door. My mother-in-law stood there in a cream-colored Chanel suit that cost more than the average American maid in 3 months. She did not wait for an invitation. She breezed past me into the foyer, her eyes scanning the house as if she were appraising a property she intended to foreclose on. "I see you are still here," she said, peeling off her leather gloves. "I thought you might have had the decency to clear out by now." "Hello? Marilyn?" I said, closing the door. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I came to make sure you understand the reality of your situation," she said, turning to face me. "Brent is too soft. He feels guilty, but I do not." She walked into the living room and ran a finger along the mantelpiece. "You are a greedy woman." "Claire," she spat out, "you signed the papers. But I know your type. You are going to try to come back for more. You are going to try to squeeze him for alimony or claim some hidden entitlement." I stood in the doorway, my hands clasped in front of me. I activated the voice recorder on my smartwatch with a subtle tap of my right index finger against the glass face. "Marilyn," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. "I signed everything. I took the house with the debt. I took the $50,000. What more could I possibly take?" She laughed. A harsh barking sound. "You think 50,000 is a lot? It is lunch money. You have no idea what Brent is worth now, and you never will. That is the point." I walked over to the side table and poured a glass of water from a carafe. I needed to keep her talking. I needed her to be specific. "I know the company is doing well," I said, handing her the glass. "But Brent says most of his wealth is tied up in stock. He said cash is tight." She took the glass and looked at me with pure disdain. She took the bait so hard she practically swallowed the hook. "He tells you that because you are simple," she sneered. "Stocks are for the public. Do you really think my son would leave his future in the hands of the market? Please, he has assets you could not even pronounce." She took a sip of water and lowered her voice, leaning in as if to twist the knife. "That Cayman account alone has enough to buy this neighborhood twice over," she whispered, her eyes glittering with malice. "And the best part? It is completely invisible to U.S. tax law. He was smart enough to move it before the divorce was filed. So you can dig all you want, you little leech. You will never find a cent of it." I felt a rush of adrenaline. She had just confirmed the existence of the Cayman account and the timing of the transfer. It was admission of hiding assets during a divorce proceeding. It was a felony. "Thank you for telling me that, Marilyn," I said. "It helps me understand why he was so generous with the house." "I am not telling you for your understanding," she snapped, setting the glass down hard enough to risk cracking the coaster. "I am telling you so you know that you are beaten. Do not try to fight the NDA. Do not try to sue. If you do, we will bury you. We have judges in our pocket. We have lawyers who eat people like you for sport." She adjusted her jacket and marched toward the door. "Remember your place, Claire. You were a guest in our world, and checkout time has passed." She slammed the door behind her. I waited 5 seconds, then I tapped my watch again to save the recording. I named the file Marilyn Confession, Asset Concealment. I sent it to Miles immediately. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Brent. The tone had shifted completely. He must have spoken to Marilyn. He must have realized that her little victory lap might have exposed a crack in his armor. Or perhaps he was just feeling the pressure of the upcoming board meeting. The text read, "I hope you are not getting ideas from my mother. She talks too much. But listen to me. If you try to reopen the settlement, I will sue you for breach of contract. I will sue you for defamation. I will make sure you never work in finance again. I have people who handle problems like you. Do not test me." He was spiraling. He was threatening me with people and professional ruin because he was terrified. A man who is secure in his victory does not send threats via text message on a Tuesday afternoon. I did not reply to him. I forwarded the screenshot to Miles with a single caption. "They are starting to get scared." I walked back to my office. It was time for the final move of the day. I had the evidence. I had the timeline. I had the recording. But keeping it on my laptop was dangerous. If they decided to send those people Brent mentioned to break into my house and steal my computer, I would lose everything. I logged into the Marrowline advisory interface. This was not a public cloud. This was a server farm located in a bunker in Switzerland, protected by 3 layers of biometric encryption. It was the digital equivalent of a bank vault. I selected the folder labeled Project Caldwell. It contained the forged signatures, the North Star invoices, the timeline of the embezzlement, the recording of Marilyn, the screenshots of Brent's threats. I initiated the upload. The progress bar moved across the screen. 10%, 40%, 80%. I watched the green line advance. With every percentage point, the weight on my shoulders lightened. Once this data was on the Marrowline servers, it was untouchable. Even if they burned my house down, the truth would survive. Upload complete. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dim light of the room, listening to the hum of the hard drive spinning down. They thought they were dealing with a scorned wife who was reacting emotionally. They did not realize they were dealing with a professional risk analyst who had just backed up her entire case off-site. I stood up to stretch, feeling the first pang of hunger I had felt in 2 days. I walked toward the kitchen. My phone buzzed again. I paused. I assumed it was Brent again, coming back with another threat. Or maybe Marilyn realizing she had said too much. I picked up the phone. It was a text message, but the number was not Brent's. It was not Marilyn's. It was not Miles. It was a number I did not recognize. I opened the message. "We need to talk. I have the files he told me to delete." I stared at the screen. The files he told me to delete. There was only one person who would have access to files that Brent would order deleted. One person who was close enough to receive those orders but perhaps scared enough not to follow them. It was not a friend. It was the enemy. But in a war like this, sometimes the enemy of your enemy is the only weapon you have left. I stared at the text message from the unknown number for a long time. The name Tessa Rowe felt like a shard of glass in my mouth. My instinct was to block the number, to throw the phone across the room, to refuse to engage with the woman who had helped dismantle my marriage. But I was not operating on instinct anymore. I was operating on intelligence, and intelligence required gathering data from every available source, even if that source was the person sleeping with my husband. I agreed to meet her, not at my house, and certainly not at the Vanguard offices. I chose a small, 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district, a place where truckers and shift workers ate pie at 3 in the morning. It was neutral ground, unpretentious, and far removed from the country club circuit where Marilyn might have spies. I arrived 15 minutes early. I sat in a booth facing the door, my back against the wall. I ordered black coffee and waited. When Tessa walked in, she did not look like the shiny, triumphant trophy I had seen in the society pages. She was wearing a trench coat belted tight around her waist, and her hair, usually blown out to perfection, was pulled back in a messy knot. She wore dark sunglasses, even though it was overcast and raining outside. She looked over her shoulder twice before she spotted me. She slid into the booth opposite me. She took off her sunglasses, and I saw the dark circles under her eyes. She looked terrified. I did not offer a greeting. I just watched her. "I did not think you would come," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She signaled the waitress for water, her hands trembling as she smoothed the napkin on the table. "I am curious." "Tessa," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Usually, the mistress waits until the ink is dry on the divorce papers to do a victory lap. Or did you come to ask for advice on how to get red wine stains out of the carpets?" She flinched. It was a small, satisfying reaction, but she recovered quickly. "I am not here to fight with you, Claire," she said, leaning across the table. "And I am not here to brag. I am here because I think I am in trouble." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You are sleeping with a married man who is currently under internal investigation for embezzlement. Yes, I would say you are in trouble. But that sounds like a personal problem. It is not just that, she hissed, lowering her voice to a whisper. She looked around the diner again. Paranoid. He is making me do things. Do things? I asked. He made me stay late 3 nights in a row, she said. He gave me his administrative login. He told me to scrub the email archives. He told me to delete specific threads from the server before the acquisition audit starts next week. I set my coffee cup down. The ceramic clinked against the saucer. He asked you to destroy evidence? I asked. He said it was just cleaning up old clutter, she said, her eyes wide and wet. He said it was standard procedure to delete duplicate files. But Claire, I read them. I read the emails before I deleted them. They were not duplicates. They were conversations with vendors who do not exist. They were drafts of the compliance forms with your name on them. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. She placed it on the table between us. It looked harmless, like something you would use to store vacation photos. I did not delete them, she whispered. I copied them. I looked at the drive. Then I looked at her. Why? I asked. Why bring this to me? You are his future. You are the new Mrs. Caldwell. She let out a bitter, dry laugh. There is no future. Claire, do you think I am stupid? I work in PR. I know how to spin a story, but I also know when a story is about to crash. She pointed a manicured finger at the drive. Yesterday, he told me to sign an affidavit stating that I had witnessed you accessing the secure server from home. He wanted me to lie. He wanted me to say I saw you tampering with the files. She took a deep breath. If I sign that, and the feds come in, I am not just a witness. I am a conspirator. I am looking at obstruction of justice. I am 26 years old. Claire, I am not going to federal prison for a man who won't even introduce me to his mother because he thinks it is too soon. I realized then that I had misjudged her. I thought she was a villain. She was not. She was a survivor. She was selfish, opportunistic, and morally flexible. But she was not suicidal. She had realized that Brent was not a golden ticket. He was an anchor, and he was dragging her down with him. I picked up the USB drive. It felt cool in my hand. What do you want? I asked. Immunity, she said immediately, or whatever the closest thing to it is. I want out. I want to walk away from Vanguard Ridge and Brent Caldwell without a criminal record. If I give you this, if I testify that he ordered me to destroy evidence, can you keep me out of the blast radius? I am not a prosecutor. Tessa, I cannot promise immunity, but you have a lawyer, she said, a scary one. I looked him up. Miles Rourke. He cuts deals. Tell him I will cooperate. Just do not let me go down with him. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the fear that Brent had instilled in her. He used people. He used me for my brain, and he used her for her adoration. And when we became inconvenient, he tried to dispose of us. I pocketed the drive. I will talk to Miles. I said, if this drive contains what you say it does, we can probably position you as a whistleblower rather than a co-conspirator, but you have to do exactly what I say. I will, she said, relief washing over her face. You go back to work. I instructed. You act normal. You pretend you deleted the files. You let him think he is safe. If he asks you to sign anything else, you say you need to check the wording. Stall him, but do not sign. I stood up. I did not thank her. She was not doing this for me. She was doing it to save her own skin. But in a war, you do not check the purity of the ammunition. You just load the gun. I walked out of the diner and got into my car. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and connected to the secure hotspot. I initiated a remote session with Stonebridge Forensics. Sarah, I said into my headset, I am uploading a new batch of files. Source is internal. Verify authenticity immediately. I waited in the car, the rain drumming a heavy rhythm on the roof. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then Sarah's voice came through, clear and sharp. Claire, this is gold. Tell me. I said, we have metadata. Sarah said, we have the original creation dates of the forged documents, but more importantly, we have a deleted email from Brent to his personal attorney. Read it. I commanded. It was sent 3 days ago. Sarah said, it reads, The wife is handled. She signed the NDA. Once Tessa wipes the server logs, there will be no link between me and the North Star accounts. If anything surfaces, we stick to the narrative that Claire was running a shadow operation. She has the financial background. It is plausible she embezzled the funds without my knowledge. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. There it was. The intent, the malice, the premeditation. He was not just pinning it on me. He was crafting a narrative where my competence was the proof of my guilt. He was using my own resume against me. And Tessa? I asked. The drive contains a chat log. Sarah continued. It is from an internal messaging app. Brent to Tessa. Quote, do not ask questions. Just scrub the drive. If you want to be my wife, you need to learn how to protect the family. Do this, and we are free. End quote. He had tied his proposal of marriage to the commission of a felony. He is a monster, I whispered. He is sloppy, Sarah corrected. And now, he is exposed. I disconnected the session and called Miles. We have it. I said, we have the smoking gun. Tessa flipped. I heard Miles exhale slowly on the other end of the line. This changes the strategy, Miles said. We are no longer defending you against a bad divorce settlement. We are now building a case for criminal conspiracy and fraud. I want to end this. Miles, I said, I want him stopped before the board meeting next Friday. We have enough to go to the authorities. Miles agreed. But Claire, listen to me. If we go to the police now, he might get wind of it. He has connections. He might find a way to destroy the physical backups, or he might flee the country to that Cayman account his mother bragged about. So what do? I asked. We need a kill shot, Miles said. A blow so sudden and so public that he cannot run and he cannot hide. We need to catch him in the act of finalizing the fraud. The board meeting, I said, realizing where he was going. Exactly, Miles said. He thinks he is walking in there to be crowned king. We need to make sure he walks out in handcuffs. But to do that, we need federal intervention. Local police will be too slow, and they might be intimidated by his influence. We need the kind of heavy artillery that does not care about local politics. I went silent. I knew exactly who had that kind of artillery. I had spent 18 years trying to prove I did not need my father's help. I had married a man specifically because he was the opposite of my rigid, military father. I wanted to build something on my own. But what I had built was a trap. And now, to break out of it, I needed the one thing I had been running from. Miles. I said quietly, I know who to call. Are you sure? Miles asked. Once you make that call, there is no turning back. It goes out of our hands. I looked at the rain sliding down the windshield. I thought about Brent's smug face at the party. I thought about Marilyn laughing at me. I thought about the 18 years I had wasted building a ladder for a man who would kick it away the moment he reached the top. I am sure. I said, I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, gathering my strength. Then I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I had not dialed in 4 years. It was labeled simply, General. I pressed call. I sat in my car, the rain still hammering against the roof, staring at the contact name on my phone screen. General. That was not a nickname I had given him to be funny. It was what the world called him. And in many ways, it was who he was, even at home. Thomas Lopez, retired 3-star general, currently a senior strategic advisor for the Federal Contract Integrity Bureau. I had not spoken to him in 4 years. Not since the Christmas dinner where he told me that Brent was a shiny object with no structural integrity, and I told him that I was tired of being treated like a soldier in his platoon rather than a daughter. I had walked out. I had spent the next years proving him wrong, proving that I could build a life without his influence, without his connections, without his terrifying shadow looming over me. But now, staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal, I realized the bitter truth. I had not proved him wrong. I had proved him right. Brent had no structural integrity, and now, the structure was collapsing on top of me. I did not need a hug. I did not need money. I needed the one thing my father possessed in abundance, the authority to stop a moving train. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, Lopez, a voice answered. It was not a question. It was a statement of presence. His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Gravel over steel, devoid of unnecessary warmth, but vibrating with alertness. Dad, I said. My voice was steady. He had taught me that panic was a luxury that survival did not afford. It is Claire. There was a silence on the other end, heavy and thick. I could hear the faint scratch of a pen against paper. Then it stopped. Claire, he said. The tone did not shift. Are you safe? Physically, yes, I said. Legally, I am in the kill zone. I did not waste time with apologies or pleasantries. I knew how he processed information. He wanted the headline, then the intel, then the ask. Brent is running a fraud scheme through Vanguard Ridge involving federal defense contracts, I said, speaking clearly and quickly. He has been embezzling funds through ghost vendors. He has forged my signature on compliance certificates to bypass audits. He is preparing to close a merger next Friday that will ratify those forgeries. He is setting me up to take the fall for 18 months of systematic theft. The silence returned. It stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. I did not fill it. I waited. Volume? He asked. 1.2 million confirmed. I replied. Potential exposure on the new acquisition is 400 million. And the signature? It is a digital stamp, I said. But he has an email trail instructing his staff to use it without my consent. He calls it a firewall. I heard a sharp exhale. It was the only sign of anger he allowed himself. You are the firewall, he said. It was not a question. Yes. Do you have the proof? He asked. Not suspicions, not hearsay. Do you have hard data that stands up in a federal court? I have the Marrowline server logs, I said. I have the bank transfers. I have a recording of his mother admitting to concealed assets. And as of 30 minutes ago, I have a USB drive from his mistress containing direct orders to destroy evidence of federal non-compliance. Send it, he commanded. Secure channel. Do you still remember the encryption key I gave you? I never forgot it, I said. Send the summary. I am at the bureau. I will look at it now. He did not hang up. He put the phone down on his desk. I could hear the typing of a keyboard. I opened my laptop, tethered it to my phone, and initiated the transfer to his private, secure Dropbox. Sent, I said, for 5 minutes. The only sound on the line was the hum of his office air conditioning and the occasional click of a mouse. I sat in the dark car, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. This was the point of no return. Once Thomas Lopez saw this, it was no longer a family dispute. It was a federal operation. Finally, his voice came back on the line. It was colder now. Lethal. The girl, he said. Roe, she is the witness? She is scared, I said. She wants a deal. If this drive is authentic, he said. She just handed us the intent. Without this, it is a messy divorce with some financial irregularities. With this, it is conspiracy to defraud the United States government. This triggers the FCIB mandate. We have jurisdiction. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Jurisdiction. That was the magic word. It meant the local police, who played golf with Brent, were out of the equation. It meant the state courts were bypassed. What do I do? I asked. Nothing, he said sharply. Dad, the board meeting is in 7 days. They are going to vote. Let them, he said. If you move now, he destroys the backups. He claims the USB was stolen or planted. He lawyers up and drags this out for 5 years while your reputation rots. You need him to feel safe. You need him to walk into that room thinking he has won. He is threatening me, I said. He is trying to scare me into silence. Good, my father said. Fear makes men sloppy, but arrogance makes them dead. Let him be arrogant. Do not engage. Do not fight back. Let him think you are broken. He thinks I am weak, I said, the bitterness rising in my throat. You are a Lopez, he said. Use the camouflage. He paused, and for a brief second, the general receded and the father stepped forward. just an inch. I read the file. Claire, you built that company's entire financial structure. Yes, I said. And he thinks he can tear it down and bury you under the rubble without you noticing? Yes. Then he is a fool, he said, and we are going to teach him a lesson in structural failure. The meeting is at the headquarters, I said. Friday, 10 in the morning. He's planning a celebratory toast right after the vote. I know the protocol, he said. I will handle the logistics. You just ensure you are in that room. He might not let me in, I said. He wants me gone. He will let you in, my father said, his voice dropping to a low growl. Because he wants to gloat. He wants to see you defeated. Give him that satisfaction. Walk in there with your head down. Sign whatever he puts in front of you if you have to. Make him believe the trap has snapped shut. And then, he said, you wait for the door to open. Who is coming? I asked, though I already knew. I am coming, he said, and I am bringing the cleaners. He meant the tactical team, the agents who secured scenes and executed federal warrants. Dad, I said, feeling a sudden wave of emotion. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. He cut me off. We execute on Friday. Until then, you are a ghost. You do not talk to your lawyer about the specifics of the raid. You do not talk to the girl. You stay in that house, and you let him dig his grave a few feet deeper. Understood, I said. The old reflex was back. The soldier responding to the commander. Claire, he said, just before he cut the connection. Yes. When that door opens on Friday, he said, his voice hard as flint. Do not look at the floor. Do not look at your husband. You look straight ahead. You look at me, and do not blink. I won't, I said. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was no longer trembling. The fear that had been gnawing at my stomach for 3 days was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet certainty. Brent had his board members. He had his mother. He had his millions in the Cayman Islands. But I had the United States government, and more importantly, I had a father who had been waiting 4 years for a reason to remind the world that nobody messes with his blood. I started the car. The engine roared to life. I drove home, not as a victim returning to the scene of the crime, but as a forward observer marking the target for an airstrike. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Vanguard Ridge headquarters felt less like an ascent and more like being loaded into a sleek glass-walled chamber of a revolver. It was Friday morning, 10 o'clock sharp. The city of San Antonio sprawled out below me, a grid of gray and green under the relentless Texas sun. But inside the building, the air was conditioned to a crisp, sterile 68 degrees. I adjusted the cuff of my blazer. I had chosen a soft, dove-gray suit. It was not a power suit. It was the color of a shadow, of someone fading into the background. It was exactly what Brent wanted to see. When the elevator doors slid open, the reception area was buzzing with a frenetic energy. The acquisition vote was scheduled for noon, followed by a press conference. Staffers were running back and forth with headsets, carrying trays of catering and stacks of press kits, but I was not led to the main boardroom. Brent's personal assistant, a young woman who looked at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity, guided me to the executive antechamber. Mr. Caldwell is waiting for you in the private lounge, she said softly. I walked in. The room was expansive, dominated by a long table made of imported teak, and a view that cost more than my father's pension. Brent was standing by the window, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass. He turned as I entered, flashing a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Claire, he said, walking over with his arms slightly open, as if he were greeting an old business partner rather than the wife he was actively defrauding. Thank you for coming. I know this is unorthodox, but the legal team insisted. He was not alone. Marilyn was sitting in a leather armchair in the corner, looking like a queen regent presiding over an execution. She was wearing a blood-red dress that clashed violently with the neutral tones of the room. Let us not pretend this is a social call. Brent, Marilyn said, her voice cutting through his performance. She stood up and walked toward the table, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. "Get her to sign the paper so she can leave. The board members are arriving in 20 minutes. We do not need the clutter of your past hanging around." Brent sighed, giving me a look of practiced apology. "You know how Mother is," he said smoothly. "But she is right about the timing. We need to clear the decks before the vote." He gestured for me to sit. I took the seat opposite him. I kept my hands in my lap, clasping them together to stop them from shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of suppressing the rage that was boiling in my veins. "What is it?" I asked, my voice low. "I thought I signed everything at the party." "Just a formality," Brent said, sliding a single document across the polished wood. "It is an addendum, a confirmation of the waiver you signed." I looked at the document. It was titled, "Affidavit of Voluntary Relinquishment and Ratification of Past Acts." I read the first paragraph. It was not just a waiver, it was a blanket confession. By signing this, I was stating that I had full knowledge and independent control over all compliance matters during the last 5 years, and that I voluntarily transferred all authority to the current executive team. It was the final nail. If I signed this, I was retroactively taking responsibility for every forged document, every fake safety audit, and every illegal transfer. I was handing him a signed confession that he could show the FBI if they ever came knocking. "I see," I said. "You want me to confirm that I'm walking away from the projects I started?" Brent nodded, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. He turned on the charm, the voice he used to close deals. "It is for your own good. Claire, this separates you completely. If the company grows, if we take risks, you are not liable. I am doing this to protect you. I want you to have a clean slate." He was lying so effortlessly it was almost impressive. Marilyn snorted from the side. "Protect her? You are too kind. Brent, she should be grateful we are not charging her for the years she spent riding your coattails." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Sign it, Claire. Sign it and disappear. Go find a nice little accountant to marry. Leave the empire building to the adults." I looked at the pen Brent had placed next to the paper. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black. I picked it up. I hesitated. Just for a second. This was the moment. Dad had said to let him feel safe. Dad had said to let the trap snap shut, but I was not going to sign my own death warrant without leaving a key for the coroner. I uncapped the pen. "I will sign," I said softly. Brent exhaled, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. "Excellent." I turned the page. I did not just sign the bottom. I initialed the bottom right corner of the first page. Then I initialed the second page. To the untrained eye, to Brent and Marilyn, I was just being thorough. I was being the boring little detail-oriented wife they despised. But I was not just initialing. I was adding a tiny, almost invisible vertical slash after the date on each page. It was a notation Miles and I had used for years in our internal drafts to denote content under review or signature disputed. It was not a legal voiding of the document, but to a forensic document examiner. It would create a pattern. It would prove that I had read the pages and marked them in a specific way that contradicted the idea of a blind, happy agreement. I reached the final signature line. Brent was watching the pen tip like a hawk. Marilyn was tapping her foot impatiently. I wrote my name, Claire Lopez Caldwell. I finished the signature with a flourish, capping the pen with a loud click that echoed in the quiet room. I pushed the document back across the table. "There," I said. "You are free of me." Brent grabbed the paper. He scanned the signature, checking to make sure it was legible. A slow, wide grin spread across his face. He looked like a man who had just cheated death and won the lottery in the same afternoon. He stood up, clutching the paper to his chest. "Thank you. Claire," he said. He walked over to the sidebar and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He did not pour one for me. He raised his glass to Marilyn. "To the future," he said. "To the future," Marilyn replied, clinking her glass against his. She turned to me, a cruel smile stretching her lips, and goodbye to the past. Brent looked at me, his eyes shining with arrogance. "You know, Claire," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I really do appreciate this. You were helpful in the early days. You were a good stepping stone, but some people are built for the ground floor, and some are built for the penthouse. Marilyn laughed. It was a high, piercing sound that grated against my ears. Oh, Brent, do not be so sentimental, she cackled. She was just the help, and now we have finally taken out the trash. They stood there, laughing together. The mother and son who believed they owned the world. They were drunk on their own power, completely oblivious to the fact that the paper Brent was holding was not a shield, but a tracking beacon. I sat there, silent, watching them. I did not move. I did not get up to leave. Brent noticed my stillness. He lowered his glass, a frown creasing his forehead. You can go now. Claire, he said, waving a hand toward the door. The show is over. I looked at him. I looked at Marilyn, and for the first time in months, I allowed a genuine smile to touch my face. No, Brent, I said, my voice steady and loud enough to cut through their laughter. The show is just starting. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask what I meant, but the words never came out. Behind me, the heavy double doors of the private lounge did not just open. They were thrown open with such force that the handles slammed against the walls with a sound like a gunshot. The laughter in the room died instantly. Brent froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. Marilyn spun around, her face twisting in shock. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I knew exactly who was standing in the doorway. I kept my eyes fixed on Brent's face, watching as the color drained from his skin, turning him a pale, sickly gray. The air in the room changed instantly, the expensive cologne and scotch overpowered by the sudden, sharp scent of authority. The silence that followed the crashing of the doors was absolute. It was not the quiet of a library. It was the vacuum of a room where all the oxygen had been sucked out in a single second. My father, Thomas Lopez, stepped across the threshold. He was not wearing a uniform, but he did not need to. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders with military precision. His tie knotted tight against a starch-white collar. He did not look at me. He did not look at the view of the San Antonio skyline. His eyes, cold and hard as slate, locked instantly onto Brent. It was a look I had seen only once before, directed at a soldier who had fallen asleep at his post. It was a look of assessment, calculating the most efficient way to neutralize a threat. He did not speak. He did not need to introduce himself. His presence filled the room, pushing the expensive furniture and the arrogant occupants into insignificance. Flanking him were two men who were clearly not hotel security or local police. They wore dark blue suits that were cut to conceal, but the bulge of shoulder holsters was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. On their lapels, they wore small, silver lapel pins, the insignia of the Federal Contract Integrity Bureau. They did not draw their weapons, but their hands rested near their waistbands, their posture relaxed yet coiled, ready to spring. They moved with a synchronized fluidity that screamed federal training. One of the agents, a man with a buzz cut and a face carved from granite, stepped forward. He held up a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gold badge and a photo ID. "Federal agents," he announced. His voice was flat, carrying to the back of the room without shouting. "We are executing a federal warrant for the preservation of evidence and the detention of key witnesses regarding an ongoing investigation into procurement fraud and conspiracy against the Department of Defense." Brent stood frozen, his hand still clutching the glass of scotch. The liquid trembled, creating tiny ripples that betrayed the shaking of his hand. His face had gone from the flush of victory to a ghostly, chalky white. For a moment, his brain seemed unable to process the shift in reality. He looked from the agents to me, then to my father, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "This is a mistake," Brent stammered, his voice cracking on the last syllable. "This is a private meeting. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a corporate headquarters." The agent ignored him completely. He turned his head slightly toward his partner. "Secure the exits. No one leaves. No digital devices are to be touched." Marilyn, who had been sitting like a queen on her throne, suddenly scrambled to her feet. Her face was a mask of indignation, but her eyes darted around the room with the panic of a trapped animal. "Do you know who we are?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and breaking. "You cannot just burst in here with guns. We are the Caldwells. I will have your badges for this. I will call the mayor." She reached into her purse, presumably to grab her phone. The second agent moved. He covered the distance between the door and the armchair in 2 long strides. He did not touch her, but he placed himself directly in her path, looming over her. "Ma'am, put your hands where I can see them," the agent ordered. His tone was not a request. Attempting to access a communication device during the execution of a federal warrant will be considered obstruction of justice. "Do not make me handcuff you." Marilyn froze. She looked at the agent, then she looked at me. Her expression shifted from anger to a dawn of horrifying realization. She looked at me as if I were a monster she had accidentally summoned from the deep. "You," she whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this, you ungrateful little witch." My father finally moved. He walked past the agents, past the table where the signed papers still lay, and stopped 3 feet from Brent. He did not shout. He did not raise a hand. He just stood there, a monolith of judgment. Brent, trying to regain some shred of his authority, straightened his spine. He set the glass down on the table with a clatter. "General Lopez," Brent said, trying to make his voice sound deep and reasonable, "I assume this is some sort of dramatic negotiation tactic on behalf of your daughter, but I assure you, bringing armed men into my office it is not a negotiation." My father interrupted. His voice was low. "A rumble of thunder that you feel in your chest, and these are not my men. They belong to the United States government, and you, Brent, are about to become their property." "What are you talking about?" Brent demanded, though the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. "I have done nothing wrong. My company is about to close a $400 million acquisition. That acquisition is built on a foundation of sand and stolen taxpayer money," the lead agent said. He stepped up to the table and placed a document on the teak surface. It was a search warrant. "We have authorized access to all Vanguard Ridge servers," the agent continued. "We have flagged suspicious transfers to the Cayman Islands, totaling over $2 million, and we have evidence of widespread forgery of federal compliance certificates." "That is a lie," Brent shouted, his composure finally shattering. He slammed his hand on the table. "You have no proof. Those certificates were signed by the compliance officer. If there are errors, talk to her." He pointed a finger at me. "Talk to my wife. She handled the compliance. She signed everything. I just ran the business. I watched him. I watched him do exactly what I knew he would do. I watched him try to throw me to the wolves to save himself." My father's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Is that so?" my father asked softly. "You claim she acted alone?" "She signed them," Brent yelled. "Desperate now. Her name is on the documents. She is the one you want." The lead agent turned back to the door. "Bring her in," he commanded into his lapel microphone. The door opened again. Brent turned, expecting perhaps another agent, or maybe a lawyer, but it was Tessa Rowe who walked in. She looked small, surrounded by the large frame of the doorway. She was pale, and she was clutching her purse against her chest, as if it were a shield. She did not look at Brent. She looked at the floor. "Tessa?" Brent breathed, the word escaping him like a punctured tire. "What are you doing here?" Tell them Claire had access to the servers." Tessa stopped near the agents. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I cannot do that. Brent," she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it was deafening. "What?" Brent hissed. "I gave them the USB drive," Tessa said. She looked at him then, and there was no love in her eyes, only the cold instinct of survival. "The one you gave me yesterday. The one with the emails where you ordered me to delete the evidence of the forgeries. The one where you told me to frame Claire." Brent stared at her. His mouth fell open. The betrayal hit him harder than the agents ever could. He staggered back a step. bracing himself against the window. "You," he whispered, "you little traitor. I did what you taught me." "Brent?" Tessa said, her voice trembling. I looked out for number 1. The room fell silent again. The evidence was in the room. The witness was in the room. The trap was not just shut. It was welded tight. My father took one step closer to Brent. He invaded Brent's personal space, forcing Brent to look up into the eyes of a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers. "You thought she was weak," my father said. He gestured toward me without looking away from Brent. "You thought because she loved you, because she supported you, that she was soft. You used my daughter's name as a shield to hide your own greed." My father leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a judgment day. "But you forgot one thing about shields. Son, a shield is made of steel, and now the shield has stood up, and you have nowhere left to hide." Brent looked at my father. Then he looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was the terrified boy who realized he had broken something he could not fix. The lead agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of latex gloves from his pocket. He snapped them on. "Mr. Caldwell, I am going to need you to place your cell phone and your laptop on the table." Slowly, Brent hesitated. He looked at the phone in his pocket. He looked at the window. For a second, I thought he might try to throw the phone through the glass. "Do it," the agent barked, his hand moving closer to his holster. Brent reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He placed it on the table next to the signed papers. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, frantic. He leaned across the table, his voice a desperate, raspy whisper that was meant only for me. "Claire," he hissed, "you cannot let them do this. This will ruin everything. The company, the stock, my life. You do not have the guts to destroy me." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had spent 18 years building up. I looked at the man who had tried to turn me into a felon to save his own skin. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my gray suit. I met his gaze with eyes that were clear and dry. I did not whisper. I spoke clearly, so that my father, the agents, and his mother could hear every word. I already did. "Brent." I turned my back on him and walked toward my father. I did not look back as the agent moved in to read him his rights. The 48 hours following the raid on Vanguard Ridge were a blur of organized chaos, the kind that usually only happens in disaster movies. But for me, it was the most orderly 2 days of my life because, for the first time, the chaos wasn't mine to manage. It belonged entirely to Brent. While Brent was being processed at the Federal Detention Center, the Vanguard Ridge Board of Directors held an emergency session. It was ruthless, without Brent there to charm them. And with the threat of a federal indictment hanging over the stock price, they turned on him with the speed of starving wolves. They voted unanimously to terminate his employment for cause, stripping him of his severance package and his stock options. The forensic team from Stonebridge had handed over their findings to the board. The directors sat in stunned silence as they reviewed the documents I had marked, every single forged signature, every fake compliance certificate, and every diverted fund I had flagged in my timeline was corroborated by the seized servers. I wasn't just the whistleblower. I had effectively done their internal audit for them. My lawyer, Miles, did not rest. He filed an emergency motion with the family court, submitting the federal warrant and Tessa's affidavit as evidence that the divorce settlement I had signed was obtained through fraud, coercion, and criminal concealment of assets. Marilyn tried to corner me outside the courtroom just before the emergency hearing. She looked smaller than she had 2 days ago. Her Chanel suit was wrinkled, and the venom in her eyes had been replaced by a desperate, bargaining panic. "Claire, wait," she said. Reaching out to grab my arm, I pulled away sharply. "Do not touch me. Marilyn," I said. "Listen to me," she hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "We can fix this. I can get you money. Real money. I have access to a trust that the feds do not know about yet. I can wire you $500,000 today. Just tell the judge you were mistaken. Tell them you signed the papers willingly." I looked at her with genuine pity. She still thought this was about money. She still thought everything could be bought. "It is over." "Marilyn," I said, "think about the family name," she pleaded. "Think about what this will do to us." "I will double it. $1 million. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I navigated to the voice memo I had recorded in my living room, the one where she admitted to the Cayman accounts and mocked me for being simple. I pressed play. Her own voice, shrill and arrogant, echoed in the hallway. "He has assets you could not even pronounce, completely invisible to U.S. tax law." Marilyn's face went the color of old ash. She stopped breathing for a second. "If you ever approach me again," I said, leaning in close, "I will play the rest of this tape for the IRS. I think they would be very interested in your definition of invisible." She backed away, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly, before turning and fleeing down the corridor. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. This was not a standard divorce hearing anymore. It was a dissection of a con artist, the judge. A stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, flipped through the motions Miles had filed. She looked at the evidence of the shell companies. She looked at the timeline of the North Star payments. Then came the final twist, the one even I hadn't fully anticipated until Miles dug it up that morning. "Mr. Caldwell." The judge addressed Brent's empty chair, represented only by his visibly sweating defense attorney. "It appears that the marital home, which was generously gifted to Ms. Lopez in the settlement, has a second lien on it." I blinked. I knew about the first mortgage. I didn't know about a second. "According to these records," the judge continued, her voice icy, "Mr. Caldwell took out a home equity line of credit against the property 3 weeks ago for the sum of $400,000. He then transferred those funds to an account solely in his name. He essentially stripped the equity out of the house, gave his wife the debt, and kept the cash." A gasp went through the few spectators in the room. It was so petty, so vindictively greedy, that it shocked even the seasoned court reporter. He hadn't just wanted to leave me with nothing. He wanted to leave me in the negative. He wanted to drown me in debt while he sailed away on my money. That is bad faith. Plain and simple. The judge ruled, slamming her gavel. The ruling came down like a hammer. The original settlement was vacated immediately. The judge ordered a full forensic accounting of all marital assets, including the Cayman accounts. She froze Brent's remaining personal assets to ensure I received my fair share. She ordered him to immediately pay off the liens on the house or transfer equivalent liquid assets to me to cover the debt. And then, she added the kicker. Given the egregious nature of Mr. Caldwell's conduct and his attempt to use this court to further a criminal enterprise, he is ordered to pay 100% of Ms. Lopez's legal fees. I walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. As I reached the lobby, the marshals were escorting Brent out of a side room where he had been allowed to conference with his lawyer. He was in an orange jumpsuit now, the cuffs around his wrists clinking softly. He looked haggard. The golden boy shine was gone, scrubbed away by the harsh fluorescent lights of reality. He stopped when he saw me. The marshal tugged on his arm, but he planted his feet. "Claire," he said. His voice was rough. I stopped. I didn't owe him anything, but I wanted him to see me one last time. "You ruined me," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "I built an empire. I gave you a life, and you burned it all down. You destroyed me." I looked him in the eye. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt a profound sense of clarity. "No." "Brent," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I did not destroy you. I just stopped covering for you. You did the rest yourself." The marshal pulled him away. He stumbled, his shoulders slumped, and disappeared through the heavy security doors. I turned toward the exit, standing near the glass doors, looking out at the rain that had finally stopped. Was my father. He wasn't wearing his suit today. He was wearing a simple rain jacket and casual trousers. He looked less like a general and more like a dad. I walked up to him, in a movie. This would be the moment we hugged and cried, and resolved 4 years of estrangement with a montage. But we were Lopez's. We didn't do montages. He looked at me. He saw the way I was standing, my back straight, my chin up. He saw that I hadn't crumbled under the pressure. "You did good in there," he said. "Thank you." "Dad," I replied. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it once, firmly. "You kept your cool," he said. "That is the hardest part." It was the highest compliment he could give. He opened the door for me, and we stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The storm had passed, and the air smelled like wet pavement and ozone. It was fresh. It was clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with it. For 18 years, I had made myself small so Brent could feel big. I had silenced my own voice so his could echo. I had hidden my intelligence so he wouldn't feel threatened. But as I walked down those steps, the sun breaking through the clouds, I realized I didn't have to shrink anymore. The world was big enough for me, just as I was. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I really hope you enjoyed watching justice be served as much as I enjoyed living it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below with your country or city. Let's see how far this story travels. And if you want to hear more stories about karma coming back around, please subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.